Now I'm sure most of you guys have been watching some of the videos I've done with Josh at Truck Stuff, and we've seen a lot of failures with this engine. Most of them that I've seen in the past and now have been roller lifter issues. Now I asked the question to somebody who had one of these trucks, one of my friends, and he did not know how to answer this question. I says, hey, what oil does your truck take? And he said 5W40. And I says, okay, well, yeah, it does take 5W40, but what's the other viscosity that you would use in this engine if it's in the summertime? And he said 15W40. At this day and age, I think most people know the answer to that question. But I think that a lot of people did not know, because for the longest time, diesel engines took 15W40. And now for Ram, they use 10W30. Now my GMC uses 15W40. I couldn't tell you what the Ford trucks use because I've never owned one before, and I've never done an oil change on one. But with that being said, yes, you see right here on this cap, it says 10W30, and it has a sun right there, which is for summertime, and then they have 5W40 for the winter time. So I had to do some research on engine oil to understand it better, because I'll be honest with you guys, those numbers are very confusing. So if you don't know, that 10 number stands for, so here it is. This is the best way to explain the oil label. So you guys see here, it says the first number, which is this one here, before the W, explains the viscosity when the oil flows when it's cold. Pretty much when the engine starts, right? Now the second number here, the second number after the W is defined by how oil flows at normal engine operating temperature. So once the engine oil gets to the right temperature, whether it be the 5W or the 15W or 10W, that 40 is going to pretty much be the same. So a lot of times people will say, oh, the reason why this doesn't really matter, because once it gets to operating temp, they're the same. So there is some truth to that, but I believe that the viscosity is still different between the two, because the oils are thinner at the 5W compared to the 15W here. So even though you're right, the engine oil will be the same at operating temp, it does change slightly, you know, here because of the thinner oil that the 5W is. One thing you guys have to understand about these engines is how tight the tolerances are. One thing that Josh has told me is this truck will tell you when you're not running the right viscosity oil in this engine at the colder temperature. See, I didn't know that. But see, I feel as though a few people who own these trucks are not doing the right procedures for them. Now, I'm not making excuses for Ram. I don't want you guys to think that I'm blaming you guys or blaming anyone that's had failures, because most people who can afford these trucks, and I'll say most people who can afford these trucks do the maintenance, and they probably know how to maintain a diesel engine. But there's always people out there who don't know how to maintain them, don't know how to, you know, start them. Like for example, Ram won't let you start this engine until the heating process is done. As you guys know, Ram has the grid heater. The other two have glow plugs. So when you go to start the truck, here's what's gonna happen. So here is your grid heater startup. And that icon has to go away. It just went away. There it is. Now most of you guys are probably wondering, well, what does that have to do with anything? I mean, the grid heater is only there to help heat up the combustion, and you are correct. However, what happens is, if that combustion is not hot enough, what will happen is you'll have wet stacking. And if you don't know what wet stacking is basically where the combustion is not at the right temperature, and the fuel that gets injected into the block does not burn out. So what happens is it slides between the pistons and goes into your oil. So I hope I explained that correctly. If not, I'll put wet stacking here for you guys. I did a video on fuel dilution. I truly believe that this is the biggest killer to a diesel engine that we probably were not paying attention to. Some people will say EGR, some people will say the whole emission system, and I don't disagree with you. But I truly believe that the biggest killer is fuel dilution, because it's a silent killer. It's not something you think about right away. So you have to make sure that combustion gets hot. I also recommend, even if you don't get down to 0 and negative temperatures, I would strongly recommend using the engine block heater. Because as I said, even though these engines are made to start in cold climates and have, you know, I can't remember the way you say it, but they're built and designed not to have oil at the startup, basically. That's what they're built for. They don't run at a high RPM like a gasoline engine does when it starts up, right? So the oil pickup has to take time to run that oil through the engine to get everything lubricated. So you want to make sure you use the right engine oil, obviously, and you want to make sure that you understand your service interval. Most people know that Ram has a 15,000 mile oil interval. And I always laugh because I've always said that it was okay. I have to admit to you guys, I've always felt as though 15,000 miles was fine, because hey, if you're doing a lot of towing and you're just consistently just rolling down the highway, you're not really deteriorating that oil as much, especially if you're like in Florida. Now, if you live in like areas like where I'm at, where you're climbing grades constantly, you might want to get that oil changed a little bit sooner. But in most cases, if you're just lugging down the highway, doing hot shot, going thousands of miles, you know, on the highway, then you probably don't have to get that oil changed as frequently, because it's 3 gallons of oil inside of there. So what is the odds of you having that oil break down? But I was wrong. I feel as though you should be changing that oil no later than 7,500 miles, half of what they tell you. And as I said in the last video I did on fuel dilution, you should probably get the oil inspected by a lab. That way you can have a better understanding of how many miles you can actually go on that oil. Because in a lot of cases, you might be surprised at just how much deterioration happens in that oil. And I would recommend too, get the oil changed in a time in a season when you're doing a lot of towing. If you use your truck for what it's supposed to be used for, like towing and doing heavy payload hauls, then I would do that analysis with the engine oil around that time frame. So with that being said, these are just some things you have to consider. I truly believe that you have to make sure you're coming up to your truck, checking the engine oil. It's right here. All you have to do is pull this bad boy out, and you see how that's actually yellow. Actually, no, it's a little bit brown. It's brown now. It's not even black. And most people don't know this. The engine oil in diesel engines is always going to be black. And that's because of the combustion. As you guys know, this is not a gasoline engine. Gasoline and diesel engines are totally different. Diesel engines need compression. And so therefore, it's like an explosion. And normally back in the day when you saw that big black cloud of smoke come out of the back of the truck, when you launched the truck, that black smoke is pretty much what gets into the engine oil too. So that's why engine oil and diesels do get black a lot quicker. So yeah, this truck only has 75 miles. And that engine oil is not even golden anymore. So with that being said, these are just some things I wanted to just bring to your attention. Know your oil viscosity you're supposed to use. I personally would rather run the 10W30 over the 5W40. That's just me, and that's just my opinion. I would use my engine block heater and keep that oil nice and warm. That way when I go to start my truck, it's flowing through. Now I do understand that the viscosity of the oil is pretty much the same once it's at operating temperature, but I just prefer the 10W30. A lot of people at the GMC store told me this. They said, don't run the 5W40, run the 15W40. And they says if it's in the wintertime, just plug your truck in. I don't know why they won't tell me the reason. They just said, and this is multiple guys who've told this to me, They just said, we recommend everyone just do the 15W40. So yeah, make sure you do your research, especially with these expensive pieces of equipment. They're so expensive. And so even though your truck will tell you, oh, do your oil change at, here it is. You know, when the truck tells you to, I don't recommend that anymore, because I mean, it says oil life is 99%, but this is for that 15,000 miles, right? So you have to understand that. And see, something else I would ask you to really take note of is your oil pressure. Start keeping track of your oil pressure in the summertime, and then take note of it in the wintertime to see, like, when you go to initially start your truck up, what is the oil pressure at? I mean, this truck's been running now for probably about 45 minutes. We've been driving it around today. So with that being said, you want to make sure you use these monitors for your truck. That way you have a good understanding of the differences on the different seasons. But I hope you guys liked the video. I definitely think that some people have been running the wrong engine oil. I won't even confirm this, but I've been told that some dealerships didn't even know the right engine oil for these trucks too. So you have to remember, you have to ask these questions. You know, when you go to a new service facility that you're not used to, ask the question. When I go here at Larry's Miller, Josh knows all this stuff. He can answer all these questions. Just something to consider. Make sure you understand the maintenance on your truck. Make sure that the dealership understands, and just make sure you don't have potential failures that are probably linked to just not doing the right maintenance on your truck.